So, satire in video games. Honestly, I ain't gonna really bother. Part of me thinks satire's one of those sort of more tricky things to execute, and part of me thinks that satire's actually pretty simple. It's more a matter of, well, satire's one of the things I quite like. You know, sarcasm, the whole irony thing, the creation and development of a medium that allows to mock something while imitating it at the same time. It's that kind of humour that sort of appeals to me. Therefore, satire's really high up on my list. Like, it's something I really, really like. But the problem with satire in video games is that quite often people don't use satire effectively, or they get the wrong idea of what satire actually is. So, like I said in my Yet Another Zombie Defense review, I genuinely not too sure if the game's actually trying to be satire or not, but it seems to be. Like, the title would indicate it. You know, the names of the people would indicate it. So either they're just being really, really lazy, or it's satirical. And if it's satirical, then fair enough, but I just get this horrible feeling that I've mislabeled it. Like, it's not supposed to be satirical, but it's viewed as that because I said so. And I don't know, honestly. Part of me feels like if it was trying to be satirical, it would have more words. Like, Yet Another Zombie Defense doesn't have any words. It doesn't have any story. It doesn't have any sort of meaning or depth or emotion behind it. It's just mechanics. It's mechanics with basic, simple gunplay and ridiculous models. It's not really the most complicated or in-depth or interesting game in the world. And Hippocampal is a marvelous piece of crazy bullshit to a ludicrous degree of ridiculousness. And to be fair enough. It's not, in the sense of its craziness, its wackiness, its just random what the fuck moments, pretty good. In the sense of the terrible treacle-like movement and the really confusing and not often well-placed or well-thought-out levels, and the clunky jankiness of it all, it's not fun. That's probably why I'm not a big fan. Like, I mentioned duty calls a lot in my satire article, and the reason is because duty calls is a really, really, really solid, good satire-based game. And it's not even a game, it's a demo. The idea is to parody Call of Duty and be like, Call of Duty is boring, play Bulletstorm. But it's a really good thing in and of itself because duty calls is actually a really nice piece of satire. It takes the crap out of everything to do with it in such a brilliant way. Like, I've not actually had as much fun as that in a very long time. It's a really, really good game. Like, unequivocally good. Like, amazingly good. I really enjoyed it, honestly. It's just, I really wish that they would have done something a little bit different when it came to things like Yet Another Zombie Defense and when it came to Hippocampal. I wish they would have embraced the idea of satire more. You see, with Hippocampal, the reason why I wasn't too impressed with the satire in that is that the satire wasn't present, per se. Like, it was, look at this, it's crazy and bullshit and ridiculous, but it wasn't anything actually that sort of amazing. It wasn't entertaining. It wasn't brilliant. It was just sort of there. It's like, look at our crazy madness! But it wasn't focused on the actual point that matters, and that point was, what are you parodying? What are you being satirical about? You know, where's the pointing out and then the look at how dumb this is, and where is that? Because I don't see it. We don't have it. It's not there. And the biggest problem with that is that because it's not there, and because you don't have it, and because you don't see it, there's this huge disconnect between the craziness and between the other thing, which is, you know, the actual satire that you're supposed to have in the game. And it's a problem. It's a problem that Hippocampal has in spades, because it's quite clearly trying to be a game all about, look at that over there. That is a terrible game, and we're going to show you how terrible it is by making a huge mockery of it. You know, we're going to be esoteric and random and spontaneous, and at the same time, they don't. They do all of that, but they do it without purpose, without meaning, without context. They don't example and then disprove. They just example. In fact, they don't really even example. They just sort of make it. They make spontaneous, random terribleness. It's not even. I say terrible. I mean it's terrible in the sense that it's not well executed based on the meaning of what it should have been. And yet another zombie defense does it in a different style. Like it takes satire out. It just makes the sort of the name simple. It makes the names of the people simple. There's no voice acting. There's no dialogue. Everything's just simple and bland and boring. It almost feels like someone had like played the Stanley Parable and they thought, you know what? If we make a slightly confusing esoteric title and bung in some really simple and effective mechanics and gameplay, we'll have a hit seller. And there was a time where Yet Another Zombie Defense, even if it was quite like maybe a week or so, maybe there was a time when that game sold pretty damn well because it was like £1 and it was a zombie defense and people were like, oh, it's satire, it's funny. It wasn't. It wasn't at all. It didn't deliver on that. I was expecting something like, what was it? I was expecting like a Duty Calls version of a zombie defense game, like where it took everything over the top, where everything just like vroomed into like explosions and like you got ridiculously silly guns and there was like this narrator in the background going, and this is terrible and shouldn't be here, and the zombies with the nukes and the virus released by the scientists. It's like, that's the kind of thing I was looking for, There wasn't any dialogue or talking or communication. It was all muted and silent and quiet and oppressed, and it just wasn't there. There wasn't that feeling that you could just sort of go on forever. It was more a matter of, it's a game, play the game. And it missed the boat. Like, satire is a subtle thing. Satire is a difficult thing to pull off in the first place. Satire isn't even something I would necessarily recommend anyone tries immediately unless you've got a really, really good grasp on the genre you're satirizing. Like, I think, was it EA? I think it might have been EA that made Duty Calls, or like a division under EA. And they know how to parody and satirize first-person shooters because they make a lot of them. You need to make a lot of them, or you need to understand a lot of them to properly satirize something. You can't just take a pick of something and do it. You have to actually know what you're talking about in that sense. And I get the feeling that the studios behind Yet Another Zombie Defense and Hippocampal may have had the best intentions in the world, but at the end of the day, they didn't really end up fulfilling on that promise of satire. And it made their games bad as a result. Hippocampal became dry and stale and treacly and dull, though with a rather spooky atmosphere that didn't really need. And Yet Another Zombie Defense just existed. It was mechanically sound, mechanically good, and everything else was boring as hell. So, TLDR, if you really want to make a good satire game, understand the genre, and remember not to skimp on the dialogue.